A good conversation can shift the direction of change forever. Would you leave it to chance? Join the authors of Design to Change and explore this series of conversations with designers and event owners. Driven by the need and conversations with event owners and event designers who use the event canvas around the world, this series explores the depths of conversations to elevate your abilities to look and act beyond the now. Episodes are hosted by Ruud Janssen,
Right.
All right. Here we are. We're back with Tim Willard. It is the 22nd of September, 2025, year plus two. Tim, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thanks, Ruud. Thanks again for inviting me and great to hang out and chat.
Yeah. So, Tim and I have a challenge on this podcast that we just discussed. And we already broke the rule in the intro. We didn't, but Anthony did, right? Because there's a word, if you listen to the year plus one episode of this podcast, that we're going to try to prevent from mentioning. And so we do have a prize for people that guess correctly how often we do mention it. And both Tim and I are going to do a word count of that word, right? I'm going to mention it once in this first sentence, which is the opening line of the book that Tim, all the way over in Cape Town, also has on his desk, because I just saw him pull it out of his bookcase behind him. Tim and I have become good friends over the past 5 years, mostly online, and once on a ski slope, having lunch with his family and another dear friend, Howie Baggett. Learn more about that in the previous episode. In this episode, we're going to try to prevent to say one word, and the word is in this sentence here. So I'm going to allow Tim to say it once after I say the sentence, and then we're going to do a head count, right? So, Tim, a good conversation can shift the direction of change forever. Would you leave it to chance?
Would I leave it a chance? As we continue to journey forward on our conversations, and we've chosen to be mindful of not using that word, a good conversation can shift the direction forever. Would you leave it to chance? I guess that's the way to avoid the word. A good conversation can shift the direction forever. Because what we really are talking about is the action and not the consequence. And I have pondered quite deeply on this when reflecting on this conversation.
Hmm.
And the last conversation was pretty intense because it was a year ago that you actually brought that idea into our conversation.
Hmm.
And so don't strike me out for this use of the word because this is the last time I'm going to use it. But you brought in the notion that in circles in which you were working, that this idea of the notion of change, that's my free one, uh, is is too much in the narrative, and we maybe need to reframe what we're thinking from that point of view. My takeaway from that conversation a year ago was actually going away and thinking very deeply about what that word means.
Yeah.
And so I've become much more aware in the work that I do. Um, it's about developing organizations and about developing events, but the consequence will shift things along. But we're not really worried about the destination.
Yeah.
What's more important is the journey.
Yeah.
And that journey is incremental shifts, horizons, where if we go back to the metaphor of the circus tent being built on subsequent hills over time, there are shifts in behavior that may or may not occur as a consequence, but they're not a destination. It's a journey. So not to
Now,
get too philosophical up front, but
no,
that's the way I see
I
it.
think this is great, and I'm sure our listeners have discovered that the word we're trying to prevent from using is part of the title of the book that is part of this podcast. designed to fill in the blank, right? Because the word change, and that's I'm doing a little head count here, um, is one that we're trying to prevent from using because when you use the word, it deflates very often the spirit or the conversational ingredients that power the direction that you're headed in, right? So, Tim Willard is a certified director. He's a trustee. He's an OD practitioner. This is organizational development, where at his practice, Navigate in Cape Town, um, he says he does his best works when he's trusted by leaders and their teams to support them in their planning and execute better together. Right. So support them in planning and execute better together. That implies that it's also a team sport, what you do.
100%.
Yeah.
100%, which is why the work of the Event Design Collective is so helpful. The language that supports the ability to play this team sport with a set of rules and parameters, so that we can actually all show up and know what roles we perform. And the event canvas kind of holds that space. It's the game board.
Yeah. Now, in your past roles, you've been a partner, a non-executive director, a consulting partner, a business mentor, and a founding partner. Is Are the partners, directors, mentors, are they part of the team or are they outside of the team?
Well, in my experience, in my history, they have been part of my team. So I would see them as a very fundamental part of my team. But in some of the roles that I've participated in, they might have a different perspective on that. But for me, the best outcome is when we engage, which actually comes back to the word that you used in my short biog is I do my best work when I'm trusted
Yeah.
to do that work and entrusted by them to bring my best self. So the answer is more if you, from a values perspective, show up as a trusted advisor, as a trusted partner, as long as you're living out your part of the partnership, um, very often then magic can flow. But
Mm,
if not every person is showing up in the same way, then magic may not flow to the extent that it might. It's really, I think, more around this idea around the art of possibility. That's the
mhm,
Benjamin Zander story.
mhm,
And interestingly, again, use the word change is the destination.
mhm,
That's the outcome. But that often has to do with solving what's wrong. And which is why that word comes in to use.
mhm,
Whereas if we start talking around what's possible rather than what's wrong, we're not sure what the consequence will be, but it will be better than it was before. The extent to which it's better is then the extent of the alignment and the consequential action from that.
yeah.
But I think, and not to your best work is still to come. Your first book, Event Design Handbook, is a great piece of work. Your second piece, which has a title, which has that word that I shall not repeat baked into it, is a great piece of work, which was a good piece of work on top of your previous piece of work.
Yeah.
Your best work is still coming. Version 3 won't have that, I don't believe, in the title because I think it's probably, and I'd like to perhaps explore it. The next book is about design for possibility. I think the world we live in right now is so fast, and things that are happening around us are so changing so rapidly
Mm,
that I think that the event design canvas's next novation. And by the way, I'm thinking about this as I go on the fly, so forgive me. You might challenge this thinking, but it's about designing for possibility. Um, and that's comes back to the idea around scenario learning, scenario planning is designing for possibilities in a multiple through multiple perspectives so that whatever possibility emerges, you've at least thought about how you might execute on it, so you're almost never wrong.
Yeah. Now, sorry, we're also at a kind of a crossroads where my business partner Roel and I are having conversations and exploring other areas way beyond um, the scenarios that you were talking about when you talk about your Navigate practice, which is this concept of futures literacy, right? And the thing that startled us most about futures literacy is that it is not outcome driven. And so it also makes us wonder if the concept of progress over time, right, is determined by the beginning and the end point. If there is no end point, how can you determine if there's progress, right? So, do you feel like you need a futures literacy, let's say, thinking about something that's way beyond your horizon of influence, right? And this is a UNESCO practice that is being explored. There's a podcast, if you'd like to listen to it, that we had with the UNESCO chair of this, or that my colleague Roel had with the UNESCO chair of this practice. And the thing that really did startle us is the fact that it is not outcome based. It is exploratory by nature, and it is basically an exploration of all possibilities without choosing a direction per se.
Mm-hmm.
Now that sounds very confusing. I mean, we've gotten a bit philosophical in our past editions, and and I know that we can do that. But if you're talking about organizational development, an organization that usually has a limited shelf life or an overseeable shelf life, if people do not practice good organizational development, you can probably predict what the shelf life or when it will end for that organization, right? In its relevance. But do you think you need an open-ended kind of horizon of change when it comes to the future or future literacy into the far future or into a future that is way beyond our current comprehension? And the reason I'm saying that is because in our last episode, or in the first one where, and I'm just holding up my old mural mug with the old mural logo from 2000 when we first had our meeting as part of a webinar for Mural, and that's how Tim and I originally met. And in that Mural Partner Jam on the 29th of October 2020, right, a little under 5 years ago, if we were looking 5 years into the future, we would have never predicted as a scenario any of the things that happened in the past 5 years. Or would we? Do you think we could have predicted the global pandemic and everything that changed as a result of it?
I I don't know. I don't know. I get a feeling that perhaps, and it's part of the way the world that we grew up in hardwired us into the need to solve problems um, precisely. But as we continue to grow and get time on the planet, I think what I have found myself becoming more at peace with is that just when I think that I've got the solution, there's a new problem that emerges in that same problem space.
Yeah.
So I become a little bit more intentional when talking to someone about developing is like, what problem are you currently solving for? But what problem are you currently solving for, as opposed to what problem are you solving for? Because when you say what problem are you solving for, what you're really saying is if I could isolate that problem, I could then, and I'm going to use one of my credits, I could then change that situation and fix that problem.
Mhm.
And as a result, everything in that situation will be all right. But the reality of the human condition is when we fix something, we, by virtue of that interaction, we we shift things within the context,
Mhm.
which creates a new set of problems. And so I find myself drawing back to systemic management practice, systems thinking, is that it's really the world we live in right now is around managing the mess. And there's a concept, mess management.
Mhm.
If we arrive thinking that everything's okay and there's just this one thing to deal with, well, then I think we've already got ourselves into a certain um, we've got a certain pair of glasses on, looking at the world in a certain kind of way. And
Mhm.
I would like to think that through the discussion in the last 5 years, we've learned that it's more around the possibilities that will move us forward than solving the problems. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be talking about what problems are we solving for, but it's more about the smorgasbord of what are the current problems or scenarios that we see that we can work towards solving,
Yeah.
because they're all systemic. We're all linked and interconnected,
Mhm.
and so affecting a solution in one place consequentially may have a knock-on effect in another place, and we don't know that yet. But it's the ability, I think the real wisdom is the ability to hold that in one's mind peacefully
Mhm.
and not go crazy about it, feeling like you're not making any progress.
Yeah.
Because when you look back on the last 5 years, have we made progress? Absolutely. Have I made progress? Without a doubt. Or at least from where I'm sitting, I believe
Yeah.
I've made progress.
Yeah.
Did I think that I was going to have solved some of my own problems, some of my customers, my clients' problems, the way that I have? Um, we set off on a journey, but instead of addressing a horizon of change, an event, we actually started looking at horizons for the possibility of change. And I've used up all my change credits now. The
I
horizon
keep
of
I keep
possibilities,
counting. I keep counting. Yeah.
the horizon of possibilities for
Yeah.
shifting and moving us forward.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think that the UNESCO, I haven't come across that. I'm going to go and listen to Rules podcast.
Yeah, it's
Um,
Hull and Loose are on that podcast together.
okay.
I'll add a link to this edition as well. And what we've started doing as well, Tim, is which is something that is different from before. We've started using the possibilities of AI in synthesizing the outputs and the key takeaways, the idea cloud and a summary of the actual conversation.
Yeah.
Sometimes conversations can go all over the place, or whilst you listen to them or have them, it feels really good, but it's hard to make compressed sense of the key things that are in there, right? And I'm sure our listeners have this all the time. If this is a pastime for you, then sometimes what may sound like rambling is a way of thinking out loud, right? Which is how some brains work. My brain tends to work like that. Um, but the ability to use, we use a tool currently called Snapside you know, to take in all the audio and to digest that so that we also have a bigger view of the current topics that are relevant in season 5 of this podcast across all of the podcasts in this season, for instance, right? Across all the seasons. And so this allows you to, and this is something, that's done also in real time at events to better capture the essence of things to take back or to digest from afar. It's also really helpful when people are conversing in a language you don't necessarily understand, right? So, example, my colleague Roel was doing training in Shanghai and Beijing in a different time zone with a colleague Chinese trainer um, in simplified Chinese, and the ability to then take that content and synthesize the essence of it and read it back, not just in your own language, but also in the terminology that you're able to understand is a really powerful thing, right? So you can transcend language barriers now using these types of tools and take out essences of things that were discussed or things that were shared. So we'll do that with this podcast as well. You can see that in real time. It's also maybe something that is it a time saver or not? I like to listen back to the podcast I had in the previous years, like the one that we had. But, knowing that a podcast could be up to an hour long, you have to carve out an hour before the recording of the next podcast to go back to the essence, or rely on your notes from last year if you can find them, right? Or on a picture of the notes, or on the synthesis of AI of those notes of the conversation, to pull out, the key nuggets of wisdom that come out of that. One of the things that will come out of this podcast, I think, is this horizons of possibility, right? And you said possibility of, the word we don't want to mention. I'll mention one more time: change. Try not to use that word, right? But horizons of possibility. But you said horizons of possibility of, right? Fill in the
Yep.
blank. Or
For
is it horizons
change.
of possibilities?
Yeah. Because I think that keeps it quite open-ended.
Yeah.
But just in this conversation, what you've already sparked off in me is a possibility I wasn't aware of. I mean, I'm aware of AI. As we touched on, I'm starting to build out in my Navigate world this idea of AI praxis.
Yeah.
And we've got to think more creatively and more intentionally about building AI into strategic work, scenario learning work as a
Mm.
practice, which is why
Yeah.
I've called it praxis.
Yeah.
But you've inspired me to now go and do a little bit more research on SiteSnap. Is that if that's what you
Snapsite. Yeah.
Snapsite?
Yeah.
Fine. So
Yeah.
is it Snapsite sounds to me like is great for the review. What I'm curious to know is, and maybe this is something we should think about collaborating on, is how you can build it out real time. Because if you could imagine a scenario in an event design process where you're getting real-time conversations being converted um, into um, into data points, it's it's not so much about the acceleration of the process that I'd be interested in. I'd
Hmm.
just be more interested in the third eye, a third perspective. I think that's one of the things that I've come to learn and love about the idea of AI, is that just a perspective. And you can choose to say, well, it feels like I'm cheating if I defer to AI.
Yeah.
Not at all, particularly in the context of the nature of what I do, where I've used AI. I use um, curated data from the people that know, the people that are in the journey of strategic planning. I use their data and I curate content, whether it's from a form or whether it's from a voice recording, to play it back to them. But the collective um, themes that come through that data, the heavy lifting is done uh, by a large language model, and I'm not going to give them any airtime as to which one I use. There are some that I have done the research around that feel a little bit more um, as if they're not open source and as if my idea is not going to show up in someone else's world,
Hmm.
which I think is one of the things, if I speaking specifically to the use of AI, is where I don't believe we've had enough time to figure out exactly where our data is showing up when we prompt or use an agent and we ask questions, and we impute our data into that, which might be proprietary, might be enterprise, it might be IP. Who's using that IP to repeat back into someone else's prompt?
Yeah.
So, that's where I've been a little bit more cautious, but I'm 100% behind the idea, 120% behind the idea of the heavy lifting being done by the technology because it just can do it better. I also am concerned about what happens in the possibilities in 2 years' time around models being far more generative. But the
Hmm.
reality is that we're already going there. So we have to be mindful of the risks, but open to designing for the possibilities.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and I think it's funny how most people we come across, and like in this conversation, you're saying you're using a small part of the function in in a space where you know it's not too intrusive, or where you can oversee the impact of it, right? Um, Same thing we're doing with event design. Like when a team is struggling to come up with an overarching aim, and we have 12, 18 different blurbs on a post-it, taking a picture of it and asking it for turn this into a haiku, with the main essence of it.
Right.
That can happen much quicker than a human's brain, unless, yeah, some people can do that too, but the skill set on that is limited, let's say, in most teams. Um, but it's very helpful to inspire the next thing, right? What you're saying is, can you use it as a vector,
Yes.
as a third eye in this conversation, um, to extract essence and to amalgate thinking quicker, right? Or to take away some of the words that are confusing to our listener and get back down to the essence.
Mm.
I do think human conversation and the way it naturally goes in any type of direction, right? Because I think conversations in themselves have future literacy built in. I don't know what word you're going to use next, Tim. I know which word you're probably not going to use because that's what we said in the beginning, right?
Right.
I can't predict out of all of the words you could choose from which one you're going to use next. And that's the whole challenge that AI is trying to solve, right? Is to figure out the next word to use, or that a human would use, in the collective knowledge aggregated from all the knowledge that's available.
Yeah.
But the human creativity and the human spirit, or the human um, capacity to create, is something quite unique. And I think that's, the fact that we're able to create AI from scratch, right? Using large language models. I would consider the event design language to be a very, very small language model, right? We're probably one of the smallest language models on the planet, but it's
Yeah.
developing slowly, right? But by any means, a language spoken by only 30,000 people would be considered a dialect, or, you know, a very regional, verbiage that no one else needs to bother to understand. Yet it starts with a small set of words and increases over time, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think just interestingly, to your point, I didn't know what you were going to be saying in this call and this conversation, but as you're talking now, the 30,000 qualified, uh, fluent EDC speakers.
I mean,
Uh,
fluent, I would say maybe 3,000 people, maybe only a tenth of that, right?
yeah.
Um, anyway, sorry for interrupting. Keep going.
No,
It's a very small
here's
language model. It's no
here's
bigger
the
than the
thing.
village I live here in Switzerland. We have 2,783 inhabitants, I think, as far as I last
Okay.
heard.
Yeah.
That's probably the size of the community that attempts
Yeah.
to speak the language of event design. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, it brings me back. I don't know what made me think of this, but never ever forget the power and the impact of a mosquito, particularly when you're trying to sleep.
Yeah.
That small community can make a large impact, and I think you really on the edge of something really significant. If you think about the combination of a large language model talking the language of the event design collective, and being able to bring that to more people, um, which is a very, well, it's a value judgment as to whether it's helpful or not. I would think it's very helpful. Um, but at the same time, the ability of large language models now to do that, it's not exclusive anymore. You're actually able to democratize the language, make it accessible to more people. And naturally, what comes as a consequence of that is better events, which is better better for everyone, more efficient, more effective, uh, delivering better results, and interestingly, solving a wide range of possibilities, not just one narrow thing. It's very interesting. Sorry, touching on the point you made around using AI or an EDC AI agent in a session or in perhaps in a part of the process to give you some thought starters about how you get, you know, uh, a collection around a delta design delta, for example.
Mm.
It's not You're not taking away the capability of the humans in the room. You're just giving them another version. For
Yeah.
me, that's the real breakthrough is we're not saying that AI is preferential. You're just
Mm.
giving another version of what someone might have invested their time and energy in getting. It's quite
Yeah.
possible we got to the same conclusion. And that would be AI approximating human endeavor. It's also quite possible that AI gets it really wrong. And that's where I think the one thing for me that's quite important in the nature of the work that you do and I do is I don't see AI taking what I do. I see it
Mm.
being a participant in me delivering a better solution or a better range of possibilities for the people that I work with and
Mm.
in the environments I work in.
Mm.
If you see it as, well, it's going to take my job, well, then maybe that's something you need to think about in terms of the career choice you made. There
Yeah.
are places, whether it's doctors, lawyers, accountants, the professions are at risk
Yeah.
because large language models can do some of those repeating tasks much more efficiently. But that's not to say, let's stop the AI. That's to say, maybe you need to take a long, hard thought about, well, have I been looking at myself and thinking this is what's left for me? That's very much 20th century thinking, where I'll have a great education and I'll go on to university and I'll get a good profession, and then I'll retire at 65. Well, good luck to that. The world BG before Google. There was a lovely piece around this idea that shift happens, and at that stage, the idea was that we were teaching kids about careers that they were looking to do based on the history, but some of the careers hadn't even been invented, and they would be invented in time. Think about the practices of the EDC
Yeah.
when it was until you invented the language, it was, well, we did something different, and now we have this unique way of doing it. Well, now we have a better way forward, and you can create certified event designers, and people can make a career out of being a certified or being an event designer, and the best of them will become certified event designers who understand and will learn, come to understand, and become competent in the language of the event canvas.
Yeah. But practicing a language and being effective at communicating in that language are two different things, right? So I've experienced that over the last 16 years in, Switzerland here, is trying to speak Swiss German.
Right.
Being understood or being, getting a message across versus being trusted in that language are they're almost like light years away, right? Those two things. I'd like to take you back. I was looking up on your LinkedIn profile. Interestingly enough, back in 2021, you published some slides after a lot of work around scenario planning of what does, business look like in the Western Cape after 2021, right? Now that we're 4 years on from that, the scenarios that you worked on at the time, and I'm just kind of jogging your memory, and also sometimes when
Sure.
you look back, 4 years seems like a long time, but you create together with the people that you do the work with, all those data points, which are the source data for any type of large language model, right? So I would say that the work you're doing there is almost like it's the pre-large language model automation version of scenario thinking, right? Or exploratory thinking. Now, in those four scenarios you came up with, maybe you can give us a little bit like of a flashback of how did you do that back in 2020, 2021? Because you came up with four scenarios, and I like the visuals on that as well. If you're looking for it, I'll make sure to add the link to the show notes because you
Yeah.
had, I think, four outcomes. One was, the bungee rope. One was a slip knot. One was the unraveling fast. One was the tangled, right? Where
Yeah.
from we're okay to I'm okay, from ineffective structural reforms to successful structural reforms, because of what happened at COVID and what it did to the Western Cape, or what it was going to do to the Western Cape businesses. Now, 4 years down the line, you could look back at this and maybe see more clearly the impact of where it ended up. Which one of these four do you think you're closest to in 2025 when you would look at the Western Cape business in 2025? Is it Tangled, Bungee Rope, Slipknot, or Unraveled Fast?
Yeah. So those are pretty, I mean, you're really forcing me to dig deep and remember what we actually said there. So I'm busy rapidly opening up LinkedIn just to see exactly what you're looking at. I do remember it very well. Maybe the first part, maybe just talk to the first part is that so the technique around scenario learning, which we used, is a actually was invented by the Royal Dutch Shell Company, and it was Aarde Geus, who was the head of scenario learning, who brought this philosophy into the world work around the world. We just borrowed the same approach when we curated the data, and you're right. I mean, it's grounded theory development, and grounded theory is an academic concept, but grounded theory is grounded in the data. And interestingly, large language models are also grounded in the data. It's just around how you actually do the comparisons. So
Mm,
you get a whole bunch of data points and you create some themes. Those themes you then compare one to the other and you create um, interrelationship understanding, first
mhm,
affinity, then interrelationship. And then
mm,
from that, you are able to then start mapping out these axes as you described, which then
mhm.
allow the scenarios to be called.
Yeah.
I'll come back to where we've actually ended up. But the ability to do that work then um, in COVID, we launched that initiative on the 30th of March. And in South Africa, we were going to be, as advised by the South African president at the time, we would be in lockdown for 2 weeks. And we sprung upon the idea to say, could we turn this model out? What would business look like in 2021 in 2 weeks?
Mm,
By the end of the second week, talk about possibilities, arises possibility. By the end of the second week, Cyril Ramaphosa, the South African president, said, no, we're going to be locked down for another week. We were relieved because that gave us another week to get our work product out.
mm,
But the reason I tell you those time boundaries is because that was 3 weeks of work. How did we get there was using Mural actually
mm,
to do the comparative work. And so that was the process of how we got there. In terms of the outcome and to what extent that scenario which has played out, um, it's a bit of everything. And I think that's the point around scenario learning was we were trying to portray scenarios that could possibly emerge
mhm,
in 2021 so
mhm.
that we would be almost never wrong about how we dealt with those scenarios, right?
Yeah.
And that's the idea of the thinking. So
Yeah.
loop it back to the earlier point around UNESCO and this idea around thinking about the possibilities and not the solution.
Yeah.
That was really the point.
Yeah.
Um, Having said that, if you wanted to press me on where we are, it's still a tangled knot. I have to go back into the detail of what we said was
Yeah.
in the story of that scenario. But things have happened as a consequence of the ink dried, or the digital ink, let's say, dried on that work. 3 weeks we published. In fact, I recall we published the first version, and then we
Mm,
asked the curated group whether we could have some more time.
mm,
No one was paying for this. It was we were doing it for the love of the craft and actually to keep us from going crazy while staying home in lockdown.
yeah.
But it was an amazing experience. And Dale, my colleague, and I, Dale Williams, we were engaged on a number of other projects to say, well, that's really cool, but can apply it to this environment? So we took that model and we actually did some work because now COVID had taught us how to use digital tools and dexterity, Mural,
Mm,
and we did it. We did a project in New Zealand, of all places. We did a project in the UK. We did a project in Canada, and we were working remotely, scenarios around and various different things. But On the specifics, come back to the ink drying. Well, that time was the first version of Donald Trump, and Donald promised us that there was no problem and COVID was really not going to affect anyone.
Mm.
And he was almost never wrong. But the truth of the matter is that in that scenario, we predicted an outcome at 2021. 2025, we have been through the process of the end of the Trump administration, the first version, and now the resurgence of the next Trump administration. And as a nation, our biggest challenge is what's happening relating to tariffs. So, I mean,
Outside influence, really.
outside influences. So,
Another outside influence.
another influence to consider. So, I think what we've learned is that we prepare for that.
Mm.
I think if we'd applied ourselves to a scenario of 2025,
Mm.
it may well have surfaced that situation. And I'm saying the conclusion is tariffs. What perhaps the listeners don't know is that South Africa had an agreement with the United States called AGOA, the American, it's a free trade agreement.
Mm.
And much of our industry, much of our economy is reliant on produce export. And the difficulty is produce doesn't keep office hours; it keeps its own hours. So when you have a harvest of oranges that needs to go to a market, and that market, perhaps 40% is in the United States, and someone says, we don't want that anymore, you've got a small challenge on your hands, not
Yeah.
only from the simple reality of what to do with the product, but the supply chain is set up in such a way as to have accommodated all of that. And markets will emerge over time, but that produces, and there's a cost to all of that. So I'm perhaps running further downstream, but the reality is that's why we have to keep talking about possibilities, and possibilities, designing for possibilities is probably the next narrative,
And
because
it almost feels like you're putting language to options, right? Which everybody thinks about options, but they can't put a word or a clustered kind of identifier to that to that direction, right? And I think what I like about your scenario work is that it gives you a like, Slipknot, bungee rope, tangled, unravel fast. These
yeah,
are four scenarios that it creates a picture in my mind, but at the same time, it makes me wonder which one it is. Now, whilst we were doing our part of the conversation, I double checked with our friends in AI with a large language model to see what they think came out as the closest matching scenario, just as the third eye, manually kind of prompted by what we were talking about. And according to that analysis that was done whilst we were talking,
yes,
it believes that where the Western Cape stands in 2025 is that, looking at recent economic and political data, again, it's data driven, right, against your scenarios. And it says the closest matching scenario, the province has not unraveled, right? So it's not unraveling fast. It is
no,
not stuck in total stagnation, so it's not tangled. At the same time, the outcomes are not as strong as the optimistic slipknot scenario. So the most accurate fit, therefore, is the bungee rope, right? A slow, uneven recovery with partial reforms, some investment, cautious optimism, but ongoing structural changes. It then allows you to do a side-by-side table showing the 21 scenarios versus today's reality and
sure,
see the entry exit behaviors over a 4-year window in real time
yeah.
in a let's say table version, right? So
Right.
what I'm trying to do here is like wrap my head around the value of scenario planning or scenario creation versus futures literacy and its application when you're designing into the future, right? Because um, creating a future that you envisage based on your values and values alignment is dependent on so many external factors you don't influence, right? And like you said, the dexterity you need in chaos or uh, fixing something in a context that keeps shifting is really hard, right? Because fixing is almost like, yeah, you fix something that went wrong, a problem went wrong, so you fix it, and then a new thing happens, right?
Yeah.
Based on that old fix. And this is probably where my biggest kind of anxiety comes out of artificial intelligence is that it is historically accurate, but not future forward um, validating, right? It can't validate into the future. It can only base itself on historic data, just like scenario planning, right?
Hmm.
You create so many options that one of them might likely almost come out, right? Like you said, like
Yeah.
you don't really give it a color and say it's going to be purple instead of green,
Yeah.
but you give the whole spectrum of colors and you say it's likely going to be one of these, right? And
Yeah.
only in hindsight can you retro analyze and say, ah, it did end up becoming purple, right? Or it
Yeah.
did end up becoming green. Um, how, let's say, taking this as an example, right?
Yeah.
Because I do think it's super valuable to think ahead with a team of people to think about these options and possibilities. How do you manage that mess in real time, and how much time does it take to do that versus the value that it brings, right? Because that's the time
Mm.
quotient. And I'm thinking about this right now because yesterday um, we went to the International Museum of Horlogerie, the Museum of Time, right?
Yeah.
Where all the timepieces over time, here in Switzerland, there's in La Chaux de Fonds, a UNESCO World Heritage Village built by Le Corbusier. There's a wonderful museum that tells you how time has been told over time and how exact time is
Yeah.
today, right? So the most exact time machine is there. It's still off by a whole lot of zeros, behind a comma and a one, right? So it's still
Yeah.
not, exactly exact, but we've got a much closer to exactness in time.
Yeah.
Now, if time is something we're obsessed with, and then, oh, I almost said it, the delta is over time, right?
Yeah.
The things that get altered from time point one to time point two.
Yeah.
2021 research, Western Cape, where is it likely going to end in the future? And
Yeah.
where are we in 2025? Now you've got the options and the roadmap, and you can almost retrace how it went or where it went
Yeah.
in a recent past.
Yeah. So the part that's probably not amplified in the presentation is the last part of all of this is this idea of flags. And a flag is an indicator, is a metric
Mhm.
of the extent to which a scenario is planning out.
Yeah,
So in fact, if you go to the slide volume of that work,
yeah,
I'm just looking at some, it's the 33rd slide. It's not well illustrated. It's well talked about in the video, but it's not very, very well illustrated. That shows top right-hand corner, the bungee rope scenario is a green flag. There's an orange flag on the scenario around Tangle. There's a red flag on Unraveling Fast, and there's
yeah.
an orange one on the Slipknot.
Mm,
What we were trying to do is say if you can start to observe things that are coming through in those scenarios. So as was there were some elements that were talking about how this if there was, for example, one of the data points within the bungee rope scenario was that there was strong alignment on a recovery strategy for the Western Cape, and
mm,
the parties started creating alliances in the background, the
mm,
dominant party. And so interestingly, that actually happened. And we now have South Africa is governed by a government of national unity, where the ruling party in the general election lost majority, so couldn't form a government without aligning, and it aligned with the opposition.
mhm.
So the ANC and the DA aligned. And so, as you can see in real time, we're able to use the flag to say, well, that flag is going up. So that is why that's a green flag, because we saw that emerging. Now, in
Yeah,
the event that didn't happen, so if you're looking at yeah, I think it's that's exactly the one, slide 33.
mm,
If that had not happened in the narrative,
yeah,
then we wouldn't have had that green scenario. What's interesting is this idea around national pride, the fact that we became, as it turned out, I haven't looked at this for a while, but Rugby World Cup pride. It was an event. We won the World Cup again for the third time, the first country to do that.
Yeah.
Again, that's a good indicator of that
And this
bungee
wasn't the
drop
World Cup
scenario.
volleyball, right? Just to be clear to
No, no,
our
no.
listeners.
Just be clear. I'm not sure what that sport is, but I do
The
know what
one and
rugby
only
is.
World Cup in.
Correct. Of course, of course. But so you can see that that scenario was starting to play out. And on the other scenarios, we don't see that happening. But what you're also noticing is in the structural reforms, it's not happened to the extent that it needs to happen because unemployment is not down, the GDP is not up, and
Mm,
that has been impacted by, as described, variables beyond our control. Now, what's really interesting is, and you made me think perhaps we need to go back. We still have the first curated data on WhatsApp we believe ever done through scenario learning exercise, ever done on WhatsApp as a platform. But we
mm,
still have the database there, and it's actually something that makes me think maybe we should run this exercise to say, we did 2021, but maybe we should look at 2026 in this post AGOA global tariff impacted world of ours. What could these scenarios look like? And I think we get another set of scenarios. And it's quite possible that the names of those scenarios, which are just helpful cues, will change.
yeah.
But if I think about what is transpired
Mm,
right now, we're seeing more of the tangled scenario. So the Gini coefficient, we've always, sadly, South Africa is probably one of the highest Gini coefficients, the ability to earn between the richest and the poorest people.
mm,
We've not really seen the needle move on that scenario. I think that if you look at the Slipknot scenario, that was particularly related to COVID.
mm,
But I think that the business confidence being up post the crisis, um, it happened for a while, but now there are other variables that we need to be considering.
yeah.
So so yeah, it's really fascinating now. I wasn't expecting to go on a
Back in time. Yeah.
nostalgic journey in a time capsule on
Yeah.
scenarios of the Western Cape in a post-COVID environment. But
Yeah.
what's really insightful is that the use of AI has kind of piqued my interest, and I almost want to, when we've concluded here, I'd love to look at and see what you run through your agent to
Yeah.
understand which of them have played out from the AI perspective. But I also think there's probably something to be said to take that and impute that into the next set of models. Because if we did this again,
Yeah.
we would take the data from the 256 people that were participating when the WhatsApp group tapped out or topped out, and we take an AI view, and we'll get much richer data. There's no doubt, because there'll be a much bigger set. I think one of the challenges with AI, and I've found myself doing this, particularly in prompts that I write, is I'm looking to limit responses to 7 plus or minus 2. So
Yeah.
never more than 10, because then it's a laundry list. And it's, again, humans, we don't have the capacity to take on board all that data. We do, it just takes us more time. Um,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah. Fascinating, Ruud. That's an interesting
But I think we need to like that dexterity. I try to practice whilst we talk, right? I also feel it is very distracting to ask the third eye, right? So manually prompting the third eye to think with us whilst we are having a conversation is very difficult to do in real time, especially when you're recording a podcast or
Sure.
but I think developing that dexterity will become increasingly important because we know that, breaking that fourth wall of data validation, of, employing the large language model to think with us, right? To think quicker, maybe even, or to think with more dexterity, with more options in real time is something we now can do, right? It's still
Yeah.
clunky.
Yeah.
It's not very well automated yet, but it's possible, right? And
Yeah.
I've just asked it, what does it look like in 2030? And it's created a little matrix for us to see what it looks like in 2030. Now, that reality is probably much less valid or much less um, um, credible for some reason or other than the work that you would do if you would do real-time data extraction from the experts that would know, right?
Sure.
Or is
Yeah.
it? That's the question, right? So, does it give you likelihood? Does the scenario matrix is it more is it more reliable? Is it better than your predictive outcomes? Because technically, you predicted the green angle scenario towards bungee rope. Sorry,
Yeah.
bungee ropes are safe most of the time, right? Not
Yes.
all of the
Yes.
time.
Yes.
I've also seen some recent statistics on, looking at the Rega helicopter services for like, bad accidents in the mountains, and bungee jumping is right up there. The
Yes.
dangerous
Yes.
one. So
Yes.
the bungee rope is still dependent on, who ties up the rope, who jumps on the rope. There are other
Yes.
context variables that you don't necessarily influence. Even if
Yes.
the rope is very good, there are some weak links in the whole thing too. So
Yeah.
I enjoyed doing this little real time kind of just kind of exploring your world of scenario thinking, of navigating potential futures, and also using data to validate it, which was the thing that first attracted my attention when I saw the mural session where you, based on the data, created those flags and created those words connected to scenarios for people to reduce the amount of options in their head, right? To make them more
Yeah.
digestible, to say, okay, I can remember those four, right? Or
Yeah.
I'll remember the two or three I liked, and I forget the one I think is most unlikely, right?
Yes.
But the three that stick to my mind give me a language to talk to the team of people who are also involved in this or who are concerned about this
Yes.
to latch onto it. And there must be some
Yes.
instinct that kicked in for you in 2020 when you started doing this. You said you did it
Yeah.
as a volunteer project based on, keeping your sanity in a highly unlikely scenario of being locked up and concerned about the future state of
Yeah.
Western Cape business, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure people have read or seen that over time. If you have, reach out to Tim and tell him about it,
Yeah.
or reach out to us and tell us about it,
Yeah.
because we're keen to know if this kind of work creates value without necessarily the one creating it knowing about the value it created.
Yeah. I think that it comes back to what we said earlier. What are the possible problems we are solving for?
Yeah,
And at the time, it was informed by a conversation. A client of mine said, "Well, so when we get out of this, what's it all going to look like?"
yeah,
And I guess that was really the catalyst that made me sit back and say, "Well, actually, there's a technique. Maybe we should apply that technique and see where we go with this." What I think I've come to be at peace with is that this is just a technique. AI can do this much quicker, but it's the need for the validation. There's still a level of thinking that needs to come up on top to
yeah,
both prompt the idea to reduce the anxiety and then also
yeah,
test what's coming back as to whether it actually does help to reduce the level of anxiety. Um, that's that's needs driven. So I think very often these kinds of approaches, these kinds of solutions are pretty much it's a very difficult service to go out and say I do this. It's more about people finding you and saying, well, I have this problem, and that's the nature of I think even thinking about event design canvas methodology.
yeah,
It's very very powerful, but it's also needs for people to be comfortable with themselves to say, I've been doing this my way for the longest time, and there is
mm,
actually a better way
mm,
or a different way which might yield a better outcome. Let me try it. It's again comes back to my idea around that word we're trying to avoid is we're trying to fix for change by identifying a problem and then solving it. Whereas what we're really looking for, and the idea around 3 or 4 different ideas is the possibilities which the event canvas methodology can deliver for us when thinking about events. Or, in fact, and as I recall from the training, I'll never forget it. An event could be the opening of the Olympic Games, or in fact, your wedding or your 50th birthday party. That's an event. It all
Yeah.
comes back to the same thing. You know, what are the people that are coming? What are the stakeholders that are invested in that coming for? What is the entry behavior? What's the exit behavior? And what are you looking to shift in them? If anything. And the
Yeah.
first point is being mindful of those stakeholders and actually recognizing that this could possibly be designed
Yeah.
for someone who you didn't necessarily think about. If you engaged some folk in a team sport like event design and got some curated ideas, the possibilities for those horizons, planning those horizons would be endless and much better as a consequence.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you think this is because when we started talking about this subject, um, one of the things that I asked you before we started recording what's under this AI praxis button on your website, Tim, that it looks like it's something that's coming soon, but is it
Yes.
something like we were just experimenting with, or is it something completely different, or what is it?
No, it's exactly that. And in fact, the extent to which I've even put there, it's coming soon, is exactly the point. Is it's already here.
Yeah.
But the question is, if you want it to be part of the way I look at using AI,
Yeah.
well, then let's have a conversation about how we might use it.
Mm.
Because there are there are infinite numbers of ways that we can make use of large language models.
Yeah.
It's more about being open to the possibility
Yeah.
and designing for that possibility. So
Yeah.
what's with our AI practice? It was just my way of creating a little bit of a handle around, oh, that Navigate can do AI practices. We just build it in. But so if we've talked about scenarios, but in the strategy work that I do, some of the ways I curate data is to get groups to participate. We're not getting them to abdicate their responsibility in providing context for strategy development.
Mm.
On the other side, we're actually encouraging them to generate as much data as they can from their perspective on on a strategy, but we're just using AI to curate that data in a way that just is much more accessible, quicker
Yeah.
for a group. And if they don't agree, that's okay. And that is the Navigate AI praxis.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
I think we're really on the challenge of AI is twofold. We're really still in the very early stages,
Mm.
but it's going so fast. And I think by the time it's we've got a handle on what we think it is, it will have moved even further and further and further still. So that is a little bit anxiety provoking. But at the same time, I think what holds us together um, in navigating this large language model world we're in is
Mm.
hopefully shared values. Hopefully shared values. I mean, there've always been powers of good, and
Mm.
for every power of good, there's the possibility that that'll be adulterated and there'll be evil. But we've just got to be human about it and be able to discern where we see and apply and use. And that's no different to how it was before AI, before the Industrial Revolution. There were great civilizations that failed uh, because of their hubris, their power that blinded, and we've seen organizations come and go for the same reason. And I think it's the same with AI.
Yeah.
Um,
As they said in a famous um, TV show I just watched yesterday, the taco of success drips with the salsa of failure, right? So uh, I think I think you're your your ability to avoid the word uh, change is remarkable. We're at an equal score. I just asked the AI summary of our recording to do a quick little tally. Um, because we discussed the challenge to avoid the word change throughout the conversation, right? Whilst we were exploring the planning of the AI applications is in organizational development, you reflected on the 2021 Western Cape business scenario work, concluding that the region currently aligns with the bungee rope scenario that you silently predicted as green, right? A slow, uneven recovery with partial reforms. I validated that with real-time AI analysis during our conversation, and we explored how AI can, as a praxis, right, or as a practice, can be the third eye. And I really like that word. I'm going to use that, the third eye, right? It could be the evil eye, or it could be the one that prevents the evil from happening throughout this as a strategic planning tool in event design. Your AI praxis approach that integrates large language models into organizational development work, which also emphasizes that AI should enhance rather than replace human thinking and creativity. Some next steps, because we talked about action versus consequence, right? I will, and maybe you will too, explore how Snapside as a tool for real-time conversation analysis and data extraction in event design processes can help, right? And in conversations, as we're currently doing. We're going to look a little bit deeper. And Tim, you said you would listen to the podcast on UNESCO's Futures Literacy concept a couple of episodes back, which we're going to explore further with Luce, who's the expert on that. You consider running new scenario planning exercises for the Western Cape business outlook for the near future, right? Which we already asked AI to do and see if that's something that's still relevant.
Yeah.
And then based on the count of the use of the word change, except for the two last mentions that I did as a part of this recap, in total, we mentioned it 8 times, Tim.
Sure.
And Tim, you used it 4 times, once as a free use when quoting the book title, 3 additional times throughout the conversation where you said, you mentioned it, I've used all of my change credits. I mentioned it 4 times, once in the opening book quote, and then 3 additional times during the discussion. The count aligns with our challenge to minimize the use of the word change while discussing organizational development and scenario planning. Both participants were consciously tracking their usage, with Tim explicitly acknowledging that he had used up his allotted mentions of the word.
That is funny.
So we can now gamify any conversation, using the third eye without having to think about the prompts and the inputs as well, right? So I think it is interesting
Sure.
to use it in real time. I'm excited about, practicing this more, finding out what the consequences are of it. This was a problem we were solving in this last hour during our conversation, hour and 9 minutes actually. So
Right.
we've geeked out way beyond our
It's
allotted
flown
time,
by.
Tim.
It's been wonderful. It really is. I mean, it's just interesting the idea around change. And now we've got off that topic, but
Yeah,
I find this notion of continuous improvement is probably a more helpful way of thinking about the shift, which is, and I'm finding more and more that in the client work that I do around values to culture,
yeah,
that if they come to that of their own conclusion, they will be much more resilient um, to the future because it's all about possibility. It's all about saying we'll have a go, we'll have a conversation, we'll try, we'll
yeah,
see where it goes. Not everything is going to be a winner, and I think that if we show up always thinking we're going to win, well then we're showing up looking for the consequence, not the driver. Winning is the consequence. The driver is what do we do that delivers the behavior that results in us winning.
yeah.
Sure, Ruud. Really, really phenomenal to talk to you, and you've really given me some things to go away and explore. Particularly, what I've thoroughly enjoyed today is the use of AI, if I can say on the fly. I almost want to get the video of your screen if it's possible. So, like, what were you doing while
Yeah,
while
yeah.
running this
I'll send you the
amazing
string so you
conversation?
can you can dig into that, as well
Yeah.
as We'll do the snapshot analysis of our conversation as well as that Zoom AI got out of this, right? To see are there deltas or differences between these two versions.
Yeah.
I'm almost fascinated. What does AI actually hear, right? What does it actually hear us say? And what's its capability to synthesize most effectively? And I think this is part of our first learning step in developing trust, right, with our AI agents. Because truth, as we see it, is multi-interpretable from whoever's perspective it might be. But this is a way of actually documenting and synthesizing, hopefully better than we were able to do it ourselves, or at least much quicker, and then spotting the then difference between what we think we actually said and what it thinks we said and summarized. Right. So
Yeah.
thank you so much although we're in the same time zone, we are, I guess, thousands of miles apart from each other. Can't wait for the next ski opportunity, or maybe, with a glass in hand, maybe in your part of the world someday soon. Meeting in person again. Thank you for this Year Plus 2 edition on the 22nd of September 2025. And until we meet again, Tim.
It's been a great pleasure and a great privilege. And yeah, I look forward to it. Thanks, Ruud.
See you soon.
Cheers now.
You've been hanging out backstage on Design to Change Designer Conversations. Thank you for tuning in, and don't forget to subscribe and share conversations online using hashtag Design to Change and hashtag Event Canvas. Want more thought-provoking content like this? Visit designtochange.online to purchase your copy of Design to Change, elevating your abilities to look and act beyond the now. Don't forget, it's more than just a book. Experience a hard copy, audio format, video format, and even augmented reality. Experience it in your style and format. Tune into our next episodes and hear from more designers and change makers. Until then, we look forward to our next conversation.